The air in the penthouse tasted expensive. It was a mix of polished marble, rare orchids, and the sharp, botanical scent of gin from the open bar. This was the annual Vance Vortex, the party thrown by Elias Vance, founder and CEO of Vantage Point Analytics. Attendance wasn't optional for the leadership and junior. Staff he deemed on the radar. It was a command performance. Elias Vance himself stood like a king at the heart of the noise. He was a man carved from confidence and good suits, his smile a flash of perfect white that never quite reached his eyes. He held a glass of something amber, gesturing with it as he held a small quart of nervous. VPs by the floor-to-ceiling window that showed the entire city glittering below them. Like a circuit board he owned, across the vast, echoing room. Trying to become one with a potted fiddle-leaf fig tree was Maya. She was a junior data analyst, brilliant with spreadsheets and silent in meetings. She preferred the clear, logical language of code and data to the messy, loud chaos of people. Her black dress was simple, a shield against the shimmer and sparkle around her. She clutched a glass of sparkling water, the bubbles long dead, and calculated the exact number of seconds until it would be socially acceptable to leave. The party thrummed with a forced energy. Laughter was a beat too loud. Conversations were about deals and golf handicaps and exotic vacations, each story a subtle bid for status. Maya watched it like an anthropologist studying a strange tribe. She saw Jonas from marketing, his laugh booming as he clapped the CFO on the back. She saw Lena from HR, expertly working the room, her smile never slipping. They were all playing a game. Maya had no interest in learning. Her quiet observation was a habit. It's how she noticed things others missed. The way the caterer's smiles tightened after a guest snapped their fingers. The flicker of fatigue in Lena's eyes between greetings. The way Vance's gaze would sweep the room, not to connect, but to assess, to tally up who was worthy of his attention. The evening crawled on. Maya had endured a conversation about blockchain with a man who clearly didn't understand it, and had politely extricated herself from another about yacht season in Monaco. She was plotting her escape route to the coat check when the energy in the room shifted. The crowd began to drift, a human current, toward one particular corner. There, gleaming under a dedicated spotlight, was the reason for the shift. It was a piano, but not just any piano. It was a vast, monstrously beautiful thing, its polished ebony surface a deep, liquid black that seemed to swallow the light and glow from within. The elegant gold lettering along its side spelled out Bissendorfer. Vance was already there, one hand resting proprietorially on its lid. A 1972 Imperial, he said, his voice cutting through the murmur. One of only a handful made. 9 extra keys. He said it like he was describing a rare tiger he'd shot. The sound? It's not just heard. It's felt in your bones. People nodded, making appreciative noises. Someone reached out to touch it, then pulled their hand back as if it were hot. It's a pity. Really, Vance continued, taking a slow sip of his drink. An instrument like this, with such a voice, and it spends its life in silence. A beautiful ornament. He let the words hang. It needs a player. A real one. Not someone who plinks out happy birthday. It needs an artist. He looked around his circle of employees, his challenge clear. No one met his eye. The VPs studied their shoes. The directors suddenly found their drinks fascinating. The air grew thick with awkwardness. No one here, in this world of quarterly reports and stock options, was going to risk public failure on a 9-foot Austrian masterpiece. Vance's smile turned into something thinner, sharper. It was the look he got in boardrooms right before dismantling a weak proposal. His gaze, that assessing sweep, traveled over the faces of his managers, his rising stars, and found them wanting. Then it drifted past them, over the shoulders of the crowd, to the periphery. To the quiet space by the fiddle-leaf fig tree dot, it landed on Maya. She felt it like a physical tap on the shoulder. Her stomach tightened. She looked down, hoping it was a mistake, but when she glanced up, he was still looking right at her, that sharp smile widening. "You," Vance said, not loudly, but his voice carried. The crowd parted slightly, turning to follow his line of sight. A path opened between him and Maya. Rossi, isn't it? From the data pit, all the oxygen seemed to leave Maya's corner of the room. 100 eyes swiveled to her. She felt her face grow warm. "Sir?" Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "I heard a rumor," Vance said, walking a few steps toward her, the crowd shifting with him. "Mentioned in a review, I think, that you have musical background, that you play." He made the word sound quaint, a childish hobby. Maya's mind went blank. Her annual review. Her manager, trying to pad out the personal interests section, had asked about hobbies. She'd said music. She'd said piano. It was a throwaway line, a fragment of a life she no longer lived. I haven't really played in years," she said, the truth tumbling out. It was a weak defense, but it was all she had. Perfect. Vance announced, as if she'd offered to perform an aria. "Then this will be a reunion. Come, give this old beast some life. Play us something." It wasn't a request. It was a royal decree, wrapped in false joviality. The silence was absolute now. Everyone understood the scene unfolding. This was not about music. This was the apex predator of the room, bored with his usual games, spotting a mouse. It was entertainment of a crueler sort. They were about to watch the quiet, awkward analyst be thrown to the wolves of her own embarrassment, sacrificed to the boss's whim. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. She saw the expectant faces, some pitying, some already amused. She saw Vance's unwavering gaze, the challenge in it. Saying no again would be insubordination. It would make the scene worse, draw it out. He had backed her into a corner with the smiling grace of a seasoned hunter. Lifetime of avoiding the spotlight screamed at her to run. But another part, a deeper, older part that had been buried under years of spreadsheets in silence, stirred. It was a stubborn part, a part that remembered a different kind of pressure. She didn't speak. She just gave the tiniest, almost imperceptible nod. Placing her dead water glass on a passing tray, she stepped out from behind her tree. The walk to the piano felt miles long. The click of her simple heels on the marble was the only sound. She didn't look at anyone. She kept her eyes on the instrument, its massive form growing larger, more imposing with each step. She could feel Vance's satisfied gaze on her back. She reached the bench. The spotlight was hot. Up close, the Bissendorfer was even more intimidating. It wasn't furniture. It was a presence. She slowly sat down on the cool leather of the bench, her back rigid. A soft, nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. They were waiting for the fumble, the apology, the clumsy scales. Vance leaned against the side of the piano, crossing his arms. His expression was one of pure, anticipatory amusement. The show was about to begin. Maya looked at the keys. 88 of them, the ivory gleaming like bones. She stretched her hands, her fingers long and slender. They trembled, just slightly. She took a deep, slow breath, not a nervous gasp, but a deliberate, grounding one. She let her eyes fall closed for just a second dot in that darkness, the penthouse, the crowd, Elias Vance. It all faded. There was only the memory of the feel of the keys, the weight of the action, the potential for sound. She opened her eyes and placed her fingers on the piano. The first touch was a ghost of a sound. Her right hand, fingers still looking too delicate for the task, pressed a single high note. It was a clear, pure tone that hung in the silent air for a moment, and then vanished, like a drop of water into a still pond. Someone in the crowd coughed, a dry, awkward sound. Elias Vance's smile didn't waver. He shifted his weight, settling in for the promised spectacle. This was going exactly as he'd imagined. The quiet mouse, the expensive instrument, the fumbling start. Maya's left hand joined, finding a cluster of lower notes. They were simple chords, slow and spaced apart. A sad, wandering little melody began to form under her right hand. It was pretty in a basic way, the kind of thing you might hear in a hotel lobby. A few people nodded politely, their expressions softening from anticipation to a mild, pitying interest. See, they seemed to think. She's trying. It's sweet. Vance gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug to the person next to him, as if to say, asterisk, well, what did you expect? Asterisk, but Maya was not in the room with them. Her gaze had gone distant, fixed on a point just beyond the piano's music stand. Her breathing, which had been shallow, deepened. Her shoulders, which were up around her ears, dropped. The initial stiffness in her spine began to melt away. It was a subtle transformation, like watching a person step into a familiar, comfortable room after being out in the cold. The simple, sad melody repeated once. Then, on the third time through, something shifted. Her left hand moved, not just to chords, but downwards, finding the deepest, richest bass notes of the Bissendorfer. She pressed them, and a low, resonant groan vibrated up from the piano, a sound you could feel in the soles of your feet. It wasn't loud, but it was profound. The polite smiles on a few faces froze. Her right hand answered. The timid melody fractured, then reassembled itself into something complex and fluid. It became a cascade of notes, a rippling run that danced from the high register down to the middle, precise and sparkling. It was no longer a child's tune. It was a declaration. The change was so sudden, so complete, that the atmosphere in the penthouse cracked. The murmured conversations that had just begun to start up again died instantly. A glass was set down on a table with a sharp click. Every eye was locked on the woman at the piano. Elias Vance's smirk had vanished. His head tilted slightly, as if he couldn't quite process what he was hearing. Maya's hands were alive. They moved over the keyboard with an authority that seemed impossible for the woman, who had just minutes ago been hiding by a plant. There was no sheet music, no plan that anyone could see. She was building the music in front of them, drawing it out of the air and memory. The piece swelled, becoming cinematic and stormy, full of dramatic, crashing chords that made the great piano shudder. Then, just as suddenly, she would pull it back to a single haunting line, so quiet the crowd had to hold its breath to hear it. She wasn't just playing notes. She was having a conversation with the instrument. She would lean into a fierce passage, her body moving with the force of it, then draw back, her face softening as she teased out a whisper-soft melody. The Bissendorfer responded to every touch, singing for her in a way it never had as a silent trophy. A man near the front, who had been to the symphony, felt the hair on his arms stand up. He recognized the technique, the effortless control. This wasn't someone who had taken lessons as a kid. This was something else entirely. A young woman from the accounting team, who had felt sorry for Maya, now had her hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide. She wasn't seeing a humiliated colleague anymore. She was witnessing a secret, a person entirely separate from the one who sat in the cubicle next to hers. Vance was statue still. The amusement in his eyes had been replaced first by confusion, then by a dawning, unsettling realization. He knew quality. He could tell a bespoke suit from an off-the-rack one, a rare vintage from table wine. And this pouring from his piano, was quality of a magnitude he had not anticipated. The superiority he'd felt, the power of his little game, began to leak away, replaced by the uncomfortable sense that he had badly miscalculated. The music built again, layer upon layer. Maya's left hand laid down a complex rhythmic pattern, a driving pulse that was almost like a heartbeat. Over the top, her right hand wove two, sometimes three melodies at once, intertwining them in a way that seemed impossible for two hands. A sheen of sweat appeared on her temple under the hot light, but her focus was absolute. She was somewhere else, in some private world of memory and emotion that she was translating directly into sound. For a moment, the piece became almost violent, a torrent of sound that filled the vast penthouse, rattling the glasses on the bar. People flinched, not from displeasure, but from the sheer force of it. And then, as if she had expended a storm, she guided the music into its final phase. The tempo slowed. The harmonies, which had been complex and sometimes dark, resolved into something unbearably beautiful and sad. It was a melody of longing, of something lost and remembered. It was so clear, so pure, that it felt personal, as if everyone in the room was hearing their own private story in the notes. Maya's expression, which had been one of intense concentration, softened. A deep sadness touched her eyes, a glimpse of the person for whom this music was real. Her fingers now caressed the keys, pulling the last, tender phrases from them. She ended as quietly as she had begun. One final, resonant chord from the left hand, held with the pedal so it bloomed in the air. A last, single, high note from the right, like a distant star. She lifted her hands. The sound did not just stop. It faded, dissolving into the silence from which it had come. For a long, suspended moment, nothing happened. The silence was thick, heavy, complete. It was the silence of a spell being broken, of a room full of people waking up from a shared dream. Maya's shoulders slumped, the energy that had possessed her draining away. She was just a woman in a black dress again, sitting at a very large piano. She stared at the keys, not at the crowd, her chest rising and falling gently. Then, from the back of the room, came a single, sharp, spontaneous clap. It was followed instantly by another, and then another. It wasn't polite, end of recital applause. It was explosive, a sudden eruption of sound that was almost as shocking as the music had been. People were on their feet, their faces alight with awe. They weren't clapping for their boss's amusement anymore. They were clapping for her dot. The noise washed over the piano. Maya finally looked up, blinking, as if returning from a long journey. She seemed almost surprised to see them all there. She gave a small, hesitant nod of acknowledgement, but no smile. The emotion that had been in the music was still too close to the surface. Elias Vance did not clap. His arms remained crossed. He was staring at Maya, but he wasn't really seeing her. He was seeing the wreckage of his own evening. The smug little narrative he had written, the boss, the employee, the public lesson, was gone. In its place was a different, more complicated story, one where he was not the clever protagonist, but the uncomprehending audience. The expensive piano, his symbol of success, had just spoken a language he didn't understand, and it had spoken through the person he'd least expected. The applause continued, swelling, filling the space where his authority had been just moments before. He was still standing by his prized possession, but he had never looked smaller or more separate from the stunned and joyful energy of the room. The music had stopped, but for him, the silence was just beginning. The applause was a living thing. It started as a single shocked clap and then erupted, a wave of sound that crashed over the grand piano. It wasn't polite. It wasn't the soft patter people give at the end of a school play. It was loud, sustained, full of genuine wonder. People were on their feet, their faces open and amazed. The forced, tense energy of the party had been shattered and replaced by something electric and real. Maya sat in the eye of the storm. The spotlight, which had felt so hot and exposing before, now just left her pale and washed out. The powerful connection she'd had with the music was broken, and the sudden return to the crowded room was jarring. She looked at her hands resting in her lap, as if they belonged to someone else. A tremor ran through them. The final resonant note still seemed to hang in the air, but in her ears it was replaced by the roar of the crowd. She didn't smile. She didn't bow. She simply gave one small, stiff nod, her eyes downcast. It was an acknowledgement, not a celebration. The emotion she had poured into the keys was too raw, too private. To smile now would feel like a lie. The first to reach her was a young woman from the design team, her eyes bright. I have no words. That was incredible. She touched Maya's shoulder, a gesture of shared excitement. The touch seemed to break a dam. Others surged forward, a tight circle forming around the piano bench, cutting her off from the rest of the room. Questions tumbled over each other. Why don't you do this for a living? Where did you learn to play like that? What was that piece? I've never heard anything like it. Their voices were a buzz of happy confusion. They weren't her bosses or colleagues in that moment. They were an audience who had just witnessed something magical, and they wanted to be near the source. Maya answered in short, quiet sentences, her voice almost drowned out. I used to play. A long time ago. It was just something I made up. No, really, it's nothing. Her answers did nothing to dampen their enthusiasm. If anything, her humility made the whole thing more fascinating. The story was already rewriting itself in their minds. The quiet analyst wasn't just shy. She was a secret artist, a hidden gem. The intended humiliation was now a story of triumphant unveiling. Across the expanse of polished floor, Elias Vance was an island of stillness. The crowd had turned its back on him, drawn magnetically to the piano. He was left standing exactly where he had been, one hand still resting on the cool ebony of the Bissendorfer's lid. The smirk was gone, wiped clean. His face was a careful, blank mask, but his eyes were active, darting from the excited crowd to the bowed head of the woman at the keyboard. He felt a peculiar hollow feeling in his chest. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was the unsettling vacuum left when a sure thing collapses. He had orchestrated a simple scene. The powerful man, the humble employee, the elegant instrument as a prop for his generosity and her inadequacy. The script had been flipped, torn up, and set on fire. The prop had become the main event, and the employee had become a mystery he couldn't solve. A vice president, an older man with silver hair, detached himself from the crowd around Maya and made his way over to Vance. He had a look of deep appreciation on his face. Elias, he said, shaking his head in awe. Where did you find her? That wasn't just good. That was world class. I haven't heard playing like that since I saw a concert at Carnegie Hall years ago. Vance took a slow sip from his glass, which he suddenly realized was empty. The data department, he said, his voice flat. Remarkable, the VP continued, missing the tone. She's a prodigy. Has to be. You don't get that kind of technique from evening classes. He clapped Vance lightly on the arm, as if congratulating him for this unexpected entertainment, and moved away to rejoin the others. Prodigy. The word landed in Vance's gut with a cold weight. It was a word of reverence, of rare, natural gift. It was not a word associated with junior staff, who filed TPS reports. He watched as the party's energy reconfigured itself entirely around the piano. The canapés were forgotten. The expensive scotch was just drinks now, not status symbols. Everyone was talking, not about deals or golf, but about the music. About her. They were pulling out phones, not to check emails, but to look up musical terms, to see if they could find who she was. He overheard snippets carried on the buzzy air, like something from a movie soundtrack, but alive. Her hands were a blur. Did you see the left hand work? I heard someone say she studied at some big music school when she was a kid. This last snippet caught his ear. It came from two junior associates leaning against the bar, their heads close together. "No, seriously," one said, lowering her voice. "My cousin is a musician. I texted him a video snippet I took. He just wrote back in all caps. He said that kind of improvisational structure, that technique. He said it's conservatory level, top tier. He asked if she was a touring pianist using a pseudonym." The other associate whistled low. "So Vance tried to embarrass a secret concert pianist. Wow. That's backfired spectacularly." They laughed, a quiet, knowing laugh, and immediately tried to stifle it when they saw Vance looking in their direction. They turned quickly back to their drinks. A hot flush crept up Vance's neck. Secret concert pianist. The phrase was absurd, and yet it fit the evidence. The sheer, shocking gap between the woman he thought he knew, the silent, efficient data worker, and the force of nature, who had just commandeered his piano, was too vast to be explained by a mere hobby. He had wanted to make her small. Instead, he had provided the stage for her to reveal a vastness he couldn't comprehend. He had been the one made small. The hollow feeling began to curdle into something else, a sharp, prickling shame. It wasn't just about being wrong. It was about the intent. He saw now, with brutal clarity, that everyone in the room had seen his intent from the start. They had all watched him set up his little joke, and now they were watching the joke laugh in his face. His prized Bissendorfer, a monument to his own wealth and taste, was now just the tool she had used. It was hers in a way it had never been his. He owned it, but she had spoken with it. The difference was humiliating. He finally pushed himself away from the piano, the connection broken. He needed to move, to do something. He walked toward the bar, but the path felt different. People nodded at him, but their eyes were still bright from the shared experience at the piano. Their attention was elsewhere. For the first time in his own home, at his own party, Elias Vance was irrelevant. He ordered another drink, his back to the room. The bartender, a professional who had seen everything, kept his expression neutral, but Vance felt judged anyway. He could still hear the echoes of the music in his head. Not the melody, but the feeling of it, the deep, rolling bass that had vibrated in his chest, the intricate, heartbreaking high notes. It had been a performance of feeling, of memory. What memory? What was the story behind that sadness? He realized with a start that he knew nothing about her. Not really. He knew her employee ID, her productivity metrics, the quiet quality of her reports. He knew she kept to herself. He had mistaken that quiet for emptiness. He had confused a deep reservoir with a shallow puddle. The party began to wind down not long after. The thrilling shock had been absorbed, and a kind of weary, happy normality returned. But it was a new normality. People gathered their things, their conversations still laced with phrases about that performance, an unbelievable talent. Maya had extricated herself from the crowd. She stood by the now closed lid of the piano, one hand resting on it almost apologetically. A few people still stopped to say a final word to her. She nodded. Her smile, still small and tired. Vance watched her from across the room. He knew he should say something. The host, the CEO, something to reclaim control of the narrative. A jovial, "Well, you showed us," or a patronizing, "We never knew we had such talent." But the words turned to ash in his mouth. Any phrase he could think of sounded hollow, fake, a continuation of the same game. She had operated on a level of pure, unvarnished truth for those few minutes. To respond with management speak felt worse than saying nothing. So he said nothing. He watched as she collected her coat, a simple, worn wool thing that looked out of place among the designer fabrics. She didn't look for him. She didn't glance around the room for approval or confirmation. She just slipped out of the penthouse doors. A ghost from a world he didn't understand, leaving behind a silence that was louder than any applause. The Monday after the party felt like walking into a different office. The air in the Vantage Point Analytics building usually hummed with the steady, low-grade anxiety of deadlines and the constant tap-tap-tap of keyboards. Today, it buzzed with a different kind of energy. It was the hum of a shared secret, a story too good not to be told and retold. Maya arrived at her usual time, dressed in her usual simple clothes, a gray sweater, dark trousers. She walked the same path from the elevator to her cubicle in the data pit, a quiet space lined with identical partitions. But the space around her had changed. Heads popped up over cubicle walls like prairie dogs. Whispers skittered through the air, stopping abruptly as she passed. Smiles were offered, wide and knowing, followed by quick, awkward looks away. She settled at her desk, the familiar glow of her dual monitors a small comfort. She opened her task list, trying to anchor herself in the routine of it. Datasets to clean, algorithms to tweak, reports to run. The numbers were clean. They were logical. They didn't have eyes that stared. Her direct manager, a kind-faced man in his 50s, appeared at the entrance of her cubicle. He rocked on his heels, his hands in his pockets. "Morning," he said, his voice unusually gentle. "Good morning," Maya replied, her fingers poised over the keyboard. He didn't talk about work. He just stood there for a moment, then said, "My wife, she plays a little. The piano, I mean." She heard about Friday. He shook his head, a genuine look of wonder on his face. "She made me promise to ask. Where did you study?" Maya's shoulders tightened almost imperceptibly. "A long time ago," she said, her voice soft. "It's not really relevant to the workflow analysis for the Clayton account." She offered a small, strained smile, hoping to redirect. He got the message. He nodded quickly, a little flustered. "Right, of course. Sorry. Just amazing stuff." He gave her a thumbs up, a gesture that felt both silly and endearing, and hurried away. The story, however, had legs. It traveled through the ventilation shafts, along the fiber optic cables. It was in the break room by 9:15 a.m. I heard she was a child prodigy in Europe, a woman from marketing said, stirring her tea. "No, I heard it was a full scholarship to Juilliard," someone else countered. "But she dropped out. Stage fright or something. My friend in HR said there's nothing in her file about it." Another person mused. "It's like she invented herself on Friday night." The details were wrong, but the core truth was undeniable. The woman in cubicle 42B was not who they thought she was. The mystery was more fascinating than any confirmed fact. Meanwhile, in the corner office on the top floor, Elias Vance was trying and failing to have a normal Monday. The silence in his office was different. It wasn't the quiet of control. It was the quiet of aftermath. He'd already snapped at his assistant over a trivial scheduling conflict, something he immediately regretted. The image of Maya at the piano and the crushing wall of sound that followed kept intruding on his thoughts. He'd replayed the moment he'd called her out 100 times. The mocking lilt in his voice now sounded pathetic, even to him. He decided to walk the floor, something he did to project presence and accessibility. Today, it felt like walking through a minefield. Conversations hushed as he approached. The usual respectful nods were tinged with something else, a flicker of curiosity, a hint of a suppressed smile. He heard the word piano twice, cut off as he passed. He saw her. She was at her desk, head down, typing. She looked exactly the same. That was the most disorienting part. The profound artist, the force of nature, had vanished back into the gray sweater. How could such a colossal talent be so contained? On his way back to the elevator, he passed two young interns by the printer. They didn't see him. "So I looked it up," one was saying, her voice low and excited. "That kind of technique, the way she improvised? My music theory professor in college said you only see that in people who are trained from, like, birth. It's a whole different language. What happened then?" The other intern asked. "Why is she here?" The first intern's voice dropped even further. "I think something bad happened. You don't just walk away from that. Did you see her face? At the end? That wasn't just concentration. That was grief." Vance stopped walking, frozen by the word. Grief. It was a key that turned in a lock. The performance hadn't just been skilled. It had been drenched in feeling. A deep, sorrowful longing that had quieted a room full of tipsy, cynical people. He had tried to frame it as a party trick, a quirky talent. But it was a piece of someone's soul, and he had demanded it as a joke. The shame, which had been a cold knot in his stomach, warmed into something sharper, remorse. He wasn't just embarrassed that his plan had failed. He was ashamed of the plan itself. He had seen a quiet person and assumed there was nothing there to respect. He had confused her silence for emptiness. The final piece of the puzzle came just after lunch. He was in a meeting with his head of HR, a sharp, discreet woman who had been with the company for years. As they were wrapping up, he hesitated. He couldn't help himself. "About the employee," he began, trying to sound casual. "The one from the party, Rossi? Is there more in her background? Musically?" The HR head gave him a long, careful look. She closed her folder. "Off the record?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "I did some digging after the rumors started flying. It's not in our files. But a friend of a friend is in the music world." She paused, choosing her words. The name Rossi, with that specific technical profile. It rang a faint bell. There was a young pianist over a decade ago, a major competition winner, a rising star. She was being talked about for all the big stages. Then she just disappeared from the scene, completely. The story was there was a family tragedy. A loss. She withdrew from everything. She let the words hang in the air between them. A loss. No one knows for sure if it's the same person, the HR head continued, her voice soft. And it's not our business. But if it is, she wasn't just someone who took lessons. She was on a path to be one of the greats. She gave it up. Vance thanked her, his voice rough. When she left, he stood by his window, looking out at the city he felt he owned. He thought about loss. He thought about the sheer, well, it must have taken to build a whole new life. A quiet, anonymous life of spreadsheets and silence. Away from the spotlight that had probably become unbearable. And he had forced her back into it. Not to share a gift, but to serve his own ego. He hadn't just been cruel. He had been blind. He had taken someone's sanctuary, for that's what her anonymity clearly was, and turned it into a coliseum for his amusement. The understanding settled over him, heavy and final. This wasn't about a missed opportunity for office entertainment. This was about a fundamental failure of respect. He had treated a person like a prop in the story of his own success. The music she played wasn't a rebuttal to his power. It was a mirror, and it had shown him a version of himself he didn't want to see, small, noisy, and utterly devoid of the depth that filled the room when he finally shut up. He sat at his desk for a long time, not working. The quarterly reports, the merger talks, the stock ticker, none of it mattered. For the first time in a very long time, Elias Vance was completely still, listening to an echo of music he wished he'd never heard, because having heard it, he could never go back to being the man he was before. The week that followed was the quietest of Maya's time at the company. The initial buzz around her had settled into a kind of respectful distance. People still looked, but their glances were quicker, less intrusive. They had gotten the message from her closed-off posture in brief answers. The performance was a door that had opened by accident, and it was now firmly shut. Work was her sanctuary again, the predictable rhythm of data a comfort. For Elias Vance, the week was a slow, grinding unrest. The shame didn't fade. It crystallized. It was in the way his assistant now paused, waiting a beat longer for his instructions, as if unsure of his mood. It was in the empty space on his calendar where the memory of the party sat, a stubborn stain. He found himself listening more in meetings, really listening, to the quiet people he usually talked over. He heard intelligence where he once only heard hesitation. It was an uncomfortable new habit. He knew he had to say something. The weight of it was affecting everything. But every script he wrote in his head sounded wrong. A grand public apology in a staff meeting? That would be another performance, making it about him again. A raise, a promotion for her? That would be transactional, turning her art into a bargaining chip. It felt like trying to put a bandage on a bruise he'd caused to someone's spirit. On Friday morning, he finally acted. He called his assistant. "Please ask Maya Rossi to come to my office at 11. Tell her it's not urgent. Whenever she can step away." He wanted no pressure, no drama. He waited, standing not behind his imposing desk, but by the small seating area with 2 armchairs. When the soft knock came, he called, "Come in." She entered, looking as she always did, neat, composed, a folder in her hand as if expecting a work discussion. Her expression was neutral, professional, a shield. "Please," he said, gesturing to one of the chairs. "Sit. Can I get you some water? Coffee?" "I'm fine, thank you," she said, sitting on the edge of the chair, the folder on her lap. He sat in the other chair, facing her. The silence stretched, but it wasn't the powerful silence he used to intimidate. It was awkward, full of things unsaid. He cleared his throat. "I asked you here." "About the party." He saw her posture stiffen, almost imperceptibly. He rushed on, the words coming out in an uncharacteristic stumble. "I've been trying to find the right thing to say, and I don't know if there is a right thing." He looked down at his hands, then forced himself to meet her eyes. "I called you out that night to make a point. A stupid point. I wanted to show off the piano, and I wanted to feel like the generous host, giving the shy employee a moment. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was, I thought it would be funny. I thought you would play something simple, and people would chuckle, and it would be a story about the boss who got everyone to participate." He paused, the admission bitter in his mouth. "I thought it would make me look good by making you look small." Maya listened, her face still unreadable. She didn't nod or disagree. She just waited. "What you did," he continued, his voice dropping. "What you played. It wasn't small. It was the biggest thing in the room. And I didn't understand it. I still don't really. But I understand my part in it now. I didn't just ask you to play. I tried to use something that is clearly important to you, personal, as a party trick." He took a breath. This was the hard part. "I am not apologizing because you are talented. I am apologizing because my intent was to humiliate you. And that was wrong. It was cruel, and it was a failure of basic respect. For that, I am truly sorry." The word sorry hung in the sunlit office. It was a word he rarely used in a professional context. Mistakes were learning opportunities or strategic missteps. This was just an apology, plain and bare. Maya was quiet for a long moment. She looked out the window, then back at him. The professional mask had softened just a little, not into a smile, but into something more weary, more real. "Thank you for saying that," she said finally. Her voice was quiet but clear. It was a difficult night. I can't imagine, he said, and he meant it. And I made it more difficult. I've heard things, rumors, about your past. That's none of my business. But it makes what I did feel even worse. She gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug, a gesture of acceptance for things that couldn't be changed. The past is the past. I play for myself now. Or I did. It's a private thing. And I violated that, he said, completing the thought. I won't do it again. You have my word. Your work here has always been excellent, and that's all that will ever matter from a professional standpoint. He could see a slight relaxation in her shoulders. The meeting could have ended there. A decent apology, accepted. But Vance found he wasn't finished. The remorse had an energy to it, and it needed to go somewhere constructive, somewhere that wasn't just about clearing his own conscience. There is one more thing, he said, leaning forward slightly. What I did was wrong. But watching that room watch you, it showed me something else that's wrong. This place, this company, it runs on numbers, on competition, on the next big thing. We talk about company culture, but we don't have a space for the other parts of people, the parts that aren't about productivity. Maya looked at him, curious now. I can't give you back that night, he said. And I wouldn't know how to support your music. That's yours. But I was thinking about the other people here. The person in accounting who paints. The developer who writes poetry. The parent who spends their weekends coaching a kids' team. We only see the sliver of them that does a job. He stood up and walked to his desk, picking up a single sheet of paper. He handed it to her. It was a draft memo. I'm instituting a new program. A small one. It's an annual stipend for employees and their immediate families. It's for arts education, music lessons, painting classes, writing workshops, dance, anything. No business justification needed. No requirement to show results. It's just a bit of funding to help people explore the part of themselves that doesn't have to be profitable. Maya scanned the document. Her eyes moved over the words, then lifted to meet his. For the first time, there was a flicker of something in her gaze that wasn't weariness or fatigue. It was a spark of understanding. You don't have to name it after me, or reference any of this, she said quickly. I won't, he assured her. It will just be a company initiative. But you were the catalyst. You made me see the lack. This is me trying to fill it a little for others. It's the only thing I could think of that wasn't just about me saying sorry. She nodded slowly, handing the paper back. I think that's a good idea. The meeting was over. She stood to leave. Maya, he said as she reached the door. She turned. The music you played. It was the most honest thing I've heard in this building in a long time. Thank you for that, even though I didn't deserve to hear it. She offered a small, genuine nod. Not of forgiveness, necessarily, but of acknowledgement. Then she left, closing the door softly behind her. The change in the company was subtle, but real. The Vantage Arts stipend was announced the next month. At first, people were skeptical. Another corporate perk. But when a few junior employees quietly used it, a guitarist getting his daughter lessons, a graphic designer taking a pottery class, the story took root. The legend of the party also changed. It was no longer just the story of the boss who got shut down. It evolved into a parable about hidden depth. When new hires heard the tale, it was told with a tone of respect. Yeah, that analyst over there? She's a freaking genius. Played the CEO's priceless piano like it was nothing. Changed the whole place. Maya remained Maya. She did her work with quiet excellence. She never played the piano at the office again. But sometimes, very late, if she was the last one in the data pit, Someone might hear a few bars of something beautiful and complex from the cheap keyboard she used for testing audio software. Before it quickly stopped, Elias Vance was different too. A little quieter. A little less quick to judge. He still drove hard deals and demanded results. But he also approved the arts stipend renewals every year without question. A silent nod to a lesson learned not in a boardroom, but in a moment of shocking, undeserved grace. He had tried to force a performance to feed his own ego, and in return, he had been given a mirror and a melody. And in the end, being shut up was the only thing that allowed him to finally hear.